Now we're going to be talking about categorizing the different laws. I know we were didn't we talk about that already? But here we're talking about something different, talking about the different way to group Noahide laws, Noahide commandments, as opposed to talking about generally how do we approach all of them. This is a question of what are the different categories of the laws themselves? Are they broken down in any type of a way? What should we expect from the next two chapters? Here we go. 167. The ordering of Noahide law. All Noahide law, including the 7 laws, and that which is rational in a wider revelation, and therefore also binding in Noahide law. So all of Noahide laws, which means the 7 laws, plus whatever is rational and of a wide application, as we said before, something that's applicable to all mankind. And other laws applicable to humanity learned from other sources in scripture or tradition that we know applies to all humanity. Okay, so all these things can be set out within the framework of the 7 Noahide laws themselves. This is because the Noahide laws can be shown to cover the entire matrix of the domains of human existence, as demonstrated by the Maharal of Prague in the scheme of Noahide laws set out in chapter 3. So if you go back to chapter 3, you'll see this that discusses that. Next paragraph. So in other words, basically what he's saying is that the different categories included in Noahide law represent all the different types of commandments we can think of. And so everything really falls into the categories of Noahide law. He's going to explain a little bit more in the next paragraph. As indicated in part 1, there are a variety of ways and perspectives through which to order and conceptually understand the Noahide law. The order in which part 2 of this book chooses to set out the concrete practice of the Noahide laws starts with the Noahide laws in the personal dimension. That is to say, the laws between the human being and God. So in other words, what he's saying is, first we're going to start discussing laws that relate to the human being himself. In a vacuum, he's alone on an island, these things still apply. There are other laws that apply between a human being and his fellow. But the first grouping is in the individual. The individual, he's all alone, just him. Meaning what? Between him and God. But from another perspective, it's also the person himself, because the person severing his connection with God is basically self-destructive and self-harming. Okay. First to be treated here is the precept of belief in God. So in the next chapter, we're going to talk about belief in God, which is logically the basis of the authority for all the other Noahide laws as divinely given laws. So in other words, the laws between man and God are also not only, of great importance on their own in their own category, but they're also the foundation of the other laws, because all laws are based on the fact that they were godly given and instructed. And so the way we relate to God is the key to all the laws. In other words, if we fear him, right, at the very least, if we have belief in him, and we have a awe of him, hopefully a love of him as well, then we can fulfill all the other laws. But if we're missing that, then the whole foundation's missing. But so basically, it's, in other words, the laws between man and God are therefore broken down into 2 parts. What they are in a vacuum, they're one category of laws, but they're also really the underpinning of everything. Okay. That's what he's saying. Logically, the basis of the authority for all the other Noahide laws is divinely given laws. Because if we say that, well, why do you have to keep them? Well, because they were given by God. Well, if you don't believe in God and you don't respect God, then it's not going to make any difference, is it? So that's why it's all dependent on this one point. Which obviously explains why our sages say that if somebody admits, or shall I say, practices idolatry, then they reject the entire Torah. So usually we are very rational and very, very calculated. And we wouldn't say one thing equals everything unless there's a reason. So this is the reason, because idolatry represents rebellion against God, rejecting his authority, and that undermines everything. Similarly speaking, it says that someone who keeps the Sabbath is if he's kept the whole Torah. If he rejects the Sabbath, he denies the Torah. The reason is Sabbath rest represents the idea of testifying to God creating the world. If you don't believe he's the creator, then you're missing that underpinning of belief, and that's lacking, and therefore you're keeping of all the commandments as well. Okay, back to page 167, about 6 lines from the bottom of the page. Next are treated the interpersonal Noahide laws, which organize and relate individuals to each other as members of society. So now we have the two groupings, individual and society. The Noahide laws relating to justice, killing, and theft and material harm. Those are the other laws, the courts of justice, the prohibition against killing, prohibition against theft, and other material harm. Theft and material harm going together, I believe. These are followed by discussions of Noahide law. Of course, material harm may also relate to harming, abusing animals. I don't know, that might fit in there. Oh no, I think he's about to talk about that. I jumped the gun. These are followed by a discussion of the Noahide law, which deals with the way in which individuals and society should act in the treatment of nature. So those are the three groups: individual, society, and nature. And obviously, the eating of a living animal is nature, represents how we have to treat nature. Okay, so that's page 167. I'm now on page 168. Within each of the areas of the 7 laws, this work sets out both the basic law, which is generally in accordance with the first or minimalist view, where there is no contrary adjudication in the tradition from Sinai. It also sets out, where applicable, the further scope for conduct under the second maximalist opinion found in Noahide law. Okay, any questions so far? So the big takeaway is that the 3 categories in Noahide law, right? I think I'm going to try to move this up a bit here. Okay, so there are 3 categories in Noahide law. Laws pertaining to the individual and his relationship with God, laws pertaining to human being and society, or laws between man and his fellow, and thirdly, between man and nature. Another way of saying is there are laws that tell us how should we conduct ourselves in relation to God. There are laws that tell us should we conduct ourselves in relation to other human beings, and laws that tell us how should we conduct ourselves in relation to nature. Those are the 3 groups. Or to say it another way, there are laws that tell us what is absolutely, unacceptable way of behaving between us and God. What is an unacceptable way of behaving between us and our fellow? And what is an unacceptable way of behaving between us and nature? In other words, that's a baseline approach. It's not telling us the highest level of conduct, but the baseline, at least what should not be done. What cannot be done, what shouldn't be done at all. We shouldn't go there at all. It's forbidden to do. That's the minimalist view, but in a certain sense, when you look at Noahide as a whole, as negative commandments, prohibitions, that's what seems to imply. These are things that you should not do because they go contrary to the very idea, and they fly in the face of how a person should relate to God, a person should relate to his fellow, or how a person should relate to nature. Any questions on this? I want to add that the 613 commandments cover the exact same 3 categories, not surprisingly, just that there's a lot more detail. But if you think about it, the categories are exactly the same, right? You can go, read Hebrew scripture, and you're not going to find a commandment that doesn't fit into one of these three categories. So, okay. You know, from an ethical standpoint, these are the questions that human beings should ask themselves. What is the proper way I should conduct myself vis-a-vis God, who gave me life, created me, and gives us sustenance, created this marvelous earth and universe? What is the proper conduct towards him after all I owe him? What's the proper? So here the answer is no, the baseline is what is absolutely abhorrent to him that is absolutely unacceptable? Well, that's idolatry. The second part of it is blasphemy. Those are things that are completely unacceptable in terms of behavior towards God. And then the second category is behavior towards a human being. And then the issue is how do we facilitate peaceful coexistence between others? And what is the minimum I owe to my brother and my neighbor? And that's basically what laws of killing, theft, and material harm represent, those prohibitions. And then finally, in terms of my relationship with nature, even though clearly we're entitled to make use of it, seems it's sanctioned, it's a divinely sanctioned that we make use of nature for our needs. But is there a limit? Is there things that is ethically wrong to do? And that's where the prohibition against eating the limb of a living animal comes in terms of extreme cruelty to nature and misuse. Okay. Sounds pretty rational, doesn't it? Sounds pretty logical. Okay. Chapter 7. Here we go. Belief in God. Chapter 7. Page 169. All right, so he's going to give an overview. First, in the preface, the imitation of God as the address of values. Self-transcendence, focusing the imitation of God. So I think he's going to get a little philosophical there. We'll see how much of it we can digest. That's an A. B, the knowledge of God, the one creator God, God in creation. The unity of God, partnership, idolatry. The service and appurtenances of idolatry. Finally, the principles of faith, creation, revelation, redemption. So it's interesting because often Judaism is seen as a religion of action, as opposed to faith, as opposed to belief. And maybe Christianity, for example, is often identified or defined as primarily a religion of faith. But we see here that faith is extremely important, and all of you who've been with us for quite a while know that this is the case. One of the reasons, obviously, is that it has to do with values, because our beliefs, undergird everything we do and how we behave and how we respond to the world, our perceptions, our values and opinions. And so it's the foundation. Okay, A, preface, imitation of God as the address of values. The Noahide law, commonly set out as the prohibition of idolatry, is here discussed in the broader terms of belief in God. So in other words, we're really approaching it from a positive perspective, not just talking about what you're not allowed to do, but what is belief in God that a Noahide should embrace and adopt. Okay? This is because there is discussion in Noahide law as to whether humanity is obliged only to negate the opposite of belief in God, idolatry, or positively to believe in the focused monotheistic concept of the unity of God. In either case, this ethical imperative relates to an orientation towards God, which is one of belief. Okay. So the more simple minimalist baseline is that the peoples of the world are forbidden to commit idolatry, which is a belief in the worship, the service of other powers, and the negation of God because of that. Or there has to be an embrace and an adoption and an acceptance of God's unity, which basically means that there's no power besides him and there's really nothing else besides him at all, actually. And he's the sole energy and he's the source of all existence. And without him, nothing exists, as Maimonides says. So in a certain sense, there really isn't anything besides him. We exist because he wills us to exist. We all really come from him. It's almost like, he's the electricity in the wall socket. You pull out the plug, there's nothing. It's all those little toy soldiers, they all stop, just like in the commercial there. That old commercial with the wind up, not the wind up, with the electrical toy soldier that it would stop when the battery would stop. Anyway, so there's the same idea. Lahavdil, but there's an idea of that God is the source. And without him, everything immediately stops. And not just stops, it doesn't even exist. It goes back to nothingness. And that's a much higher level than just not worshiping idolatry. It's a belief that there's nothing else. There's nowhere else to turn. There's nothing really else that exists. And that's really also the source of the belief in divine providence, is that since he directly controls every act and every movement, and nothing, and if we have free choice, it's because he wills us to have it. It's not because we just have it and we're going one-to-one with the Almighty. He gives us the choice and ability to think and be independent. He's giving that to us. In fact, to those who say that that's even a greater manifestation of God. In other words, a certain godly quality that's given to man to be able to be independent in a certain way, and in terms of a shadow, in terms of an illusion, in terms of a similarity in some very minute way to God himself. Okay, any questions so far? Okay. Next paragraph. What is the significance of an ethical imperative to believe, and how can this be understood? This is something I alluded to a little bit before. Like, what's the ethical importance of believing in something? For the major world religions, ethical and philosophical first principles have been consciously acknowledged as transcendent values, which intellect essentially receives. In other words, basically what he's saying is that all the world religions accept that belief is beyond reason. It's not something you can reason into and you can calculate, something you accept as a first principle, and then you reason beyond it. It's almost like in school, they teach you certain rules of mathematics or physics. You never tested those yourself. You accept them, and you can build from what you were taught already as a fact and a reality of the world. So, it's infinitely different. However, there is that similarity idea that faith in God is something that we accept. It's a first premise, and from that, we can use our reason to develop further. Accordingly, it does not have problems with the concept of revelation beyond prior to an informing reason. So basically what he's saying is that religious societies don't have a problem with the concept of revelation. They're accustomed to it, and therefore they're more susceptible, they're more open and reticent to hear about Noahide belief, as opposed to he's going to say, as opposed to secular or atheistic societies. That's what he goes on to say. It has been much harder for modern secular thought to acknowledge that its first principles are also outside reason. So he's basically saying, yeah, even secular thought is the first principles are not part of reason, but they don't accept it. They don't realize it. Secular thought has singularly exalted a supposedly self-sufficient, self-supported reason. On the other hand, the traditional believing organ of the human being, the soul, with a genuinely spiritual exertion of reason, is openly professed and employed by adherents of traditional religion. So basically what he's saying is that the secular person doesn't accept, he's kind of saying they're in denial, where they really are starting at a place that's not rational, that's based on a value that they accept as fact without it being proven, and can go from there. but they don't admit to that though. So it's not something that they'll openly admit is the truth. Okay, so the point is though, is that from tradition and monotheism believes in a believing organ, in a soul, in a seventh sense, if you will, or I should say, I guess a sixth sense, which is a sense of belief that a person has, just knows. Okay, footnote number 1. There are religious traditions that speak of natural law, claimed to coincide with the content of revelation as a product of human reason. So what does this mean? This represents what could be called a spiritual exertion of reason, where reason goes beyond itself to be open to values that transcend merely personal interests and passions. So basically, in other words, from belief grows out and flows out into thinking that develops into ethical thought, which was at one time called natural law. It involves the directedness of reason beyond the person of the thinker. Beyond this, natural law theory is based on a concept of the potential congruence of reason with divinely communicated values, by virtue of the fact the human being is made spiritually in the image of God. Okay. I think this is known. I think what he's alluded to, you probably are all aware of because it's part of American politics very deeply, because it's something that the founders spoke of. It was an idea that had developed during that time, or maybe in a century earlier. But an idea of natural law meant basically laws that you don't have because a king or a government gives you. You have them inherently because you're made in the image of God. Sound familiar? Okay. So it's about certain rights that a human being has because they're made in the image of God. So that's what that's talking about. Okay. Page 171. In Noahide theology, I'm on page 171, people. In Noahide theology, this belief in an organ, the human soul, is the mirror of God in the human being. That's a very profound idea there. You should really take to think, especially if you're in the mystical side. You just said something kind of deep there. He said that the human soul is a mirror of God. A mirror. Kind of like an image, a little different. So it's a receptacle for his visions. Or it's a receptacle for his revelation. Isn't that what a mirror is? It reflects the looker, right? So the soul is described it as a mirror for the divine. Interesting.
Rabbi, I have a question.
Yes. Great.
I'm surprised they use the word theology in Noahide theology. I didn't know that it would be called theology. That was just an odd word choice, in my opinion.
Yeah, why not? I mean, theology is a neutral word. It just means the philosophical religion, the beliefs about God, and the beliefs about the philosophy of the religion, sort of. I mean, for lack of a better way to explain it. But theology is what? The study of God and metaphysical things, right?
Yeah.
So when he talks about the soul, that's a form of theology. But it's just a neutral word, nothing to be afraid of. So it is.
But Rabbi, do we run the risk of it sounding like a separate new religion when we call it a Noahide theology, that it's a new religion out there, which we want to avoid at all costs? So maybe I kind of see what Nancy's saying there. It kind of puts like it's a whole separate thing, separate from the Torah.
Right. Good point. I actually think that our author is trying to present Noahide law as not ethnically Jewish per se. He's trying to, because our author is trying to present, and very strongly trying to argue, that this is a belief system, an ethical system that's for everybody. It's for the whole world. It's universal. That's what the name of the book, right? Universal. So he doesn't want to use the word Jewish, and say it's Jewish theology, because that implies that it's exclusively related to Jews and anyone who wants to emulate them. He doesn't want to say that. Now, part of Noahide theology is that they can't make another religion outside of the Torah, outside of what they were given at Sinai. But it's still a belief for all mankind, and I think he wants to focus on that very much. And you see that so far. I don't think once he really, well, I shouldn't say that, but he very rarely refers to this discussion as about Judaism. Am I right?
When I read theology, what came to my mind was the Noahide laws have been used to guide societies to be able to live together for thousands of years. It's not like an individual concept. It's universal. That's what happened when I read theology.
I think there's definitely a lot to what you're saying, and the author agrees with you that, and wants to really press the point that Noahide law and practice and belief is something that's part of the human tradition and human history. Most societies historically. He's not presenting something new, maybe something a little bit new and something improved but not new, or something a little bit more authentic but not new. In other words, and he said that in the beginning of the book, that that basically he's trying to promote Abrahamic belief, and that obviously Christianity, Islam, and even Hinduism are based on. And that's really going far to say, but that's, yeah. So, thank you, Laurie. So Laurie's giving us a definition that theology is the study of the nature of God, religious truth, rational inquiry into religious questions. So, the first element of it is a little bit maybe more Christian, the nature of God. Well, I guess you could say we study that. We study more in the negative, meaning to say we can talk about what we don't know about God, or we can say that he's unfathomable, but we won't talk about God in terms of this is what he is. We can talk about him as being infinite, I guess, but we talk about him more as being something that can't be grasped. But in any event, yeah, there are certain aspects of God that we talk about and have talked about and are important to talk about, and religious truth. So if looking at this definition, does that fit our discussion right now in terms of talking about the soul, and again, and certain aspects of belief in God and his unity? I think so. I think you could use it for Judaism. But no, he's not promoting Noahidism as Noahide belief as separate from the Torah, from Judaism. Okay. Good questions. Good points.
Thank you.
Okay. Rabbi, one last question or comment. Wouldn't that first statement equally apply to Judaism also? Wouldn't that equally apply or be a good statement for Judaism also?
I think so. Yeah. Yeah, I think so. I think what plays a little bit less to play in his writings so far about human relationship with, at least what we've covered, but doesn't come up as much, is the covenant. In other words, there's a lot of discussion about the flow of the obligations of Noahide law relating to man being created in God's image, but not as much a discussion about a covenantal relationship. between humankind and God. Doesn't seem to discuss that as much. In other words, a covenant with Noah, and obviously that being maybe in a certain sense replaced, or the Noahide law being given once again to Moses. So you're lacking that covenant where the Sinaitic, event and the giving of the Torah to the children of Israel and the Jewish people at Sinai was all connected to the redemption from Egypt, which created a covenant. There was one with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, but there was a covenant, I think, created with the children of Israel too. I took you out of Egypt, you accept my laws. We don't really have that so much, and he doesn't seem to discuss it as much in terms of I saved you from the flood and you accept my laws. It's not really that discussed. I think it may have mentioned it in the early chapters, but it doesn't seem to be the main thrust of things. So, all right, just pointing that out. Okay. Where are we up to in that paragraph? In Noahide theology, this believing organ, the human soul, is the mirror of God in the human being. In biblical terms, it is called the image or spiritual likeness of God, in which the human being was created. So it's interesting is that these different ways of referring to the soul: a believing organ, a mirror of God, image of God, a spiritual likeness of God. And obviously they're all true. The complex unity of the human being, which consists of soul, intellect, and body, the soul is the principal aspect of the person. So this was talked a lot about in the earlier chapters, which I think we covered some of it in earlier lectures. In the words of Viktor Frankl, the soul has intellect and body at its disposal for the tasks and challenges which a person faces in life. So it's almost like the real person is the soul, and its tools are the intellect and the body. That's the way it should be. Okay.
Yeah, Rabbi, I was also surprised that it was divided up into three: soul, intellect, and body.
Why is that surprising?
Well, because I've always heard it talked about the soul and the body.
Yeah, but there is this third component. I mean, I think he's bringing out a very important point. It's intellect. And there are, within some writings, even in Judaism, there are those that make, intellect closely equivalent with the soul. But we are not doing that. The author's approach is that the soul is above reason, as he said before. The soul and its principles are before reason starts. In other words, the soul knows what the universal truths are, just inherently. It's just something it senses. The same way you look out, you see me right now. Am I something you prove and you say, well, there is something called an image, and there's somebody named David Weissman, and so no, you don't. It's not a calculation of math or reason. You can see me, so I'm here. Same thing. The soul knows the truths about God. Those things are buried when the soul enters the body, and there's a lot of things we're not fully aware of. But at the same time, when a person feels the feeling, that's just something I would never do that. God forbid that I take a life. God forbid that people feel lying, for example, is something inherently wrong. Where, killing or harming another person. Where does that come from? And actually some people don't have that so much, unfortunately. But, that comes from the soul, that it already has certain truths that it really already knows. And the thing is that it's through action that we really, more than our conscious thinking, it's through action that we speak about what we truly believe or don't believe, or what's true or what isn't. And so when it comes to when the body or the intellect seek to do something, that is directly so contrary to what the soul sees as the truth, suddenly a person feels this, the subconscious come to the surface and tug them, saying, no, you can't do that. You know, or maybe it's like cannibalism is another example. Is it something that a person is just disgusted by? Where does that come from? Why do people feel other people are unique in that way? Sacred, where did that come from? You know, and so these are things that are just there. They're first truths that the soul knows. And that's why he's making them into different categories, because intellect is about reasoning. It's a tool. It's a power. It's a certain ability of the, you know, the soul to that the being, the person uses in order to develop what the soul should be used anyway, to develop what the soul sets as values. If the person, on the other hand, if God forbid the body dominates, including, you know, self-centered egoism, and reason is used to justify and rationalize and facilitate the body's wants, that's when you have a wicked person.
Didn't Maimonides tell us that the greatest compliment we can give to the Creator is to develop our intellect so that we can understand Him to the fullest potential as a human?
So that's the description of using the intellect to follow what the soul wants to do. So the soul is the driver, and the intellect is how a person, you know, gets close. But I will also add that there are many of the view that Maimonides was of the view that intellect was the highest attribute, and basically it's almost synonymous with the soul. So there's kind of a little bit of a different approach. This is a more Hasidic approach, and in a certain way, it has some very strong arguments in that intellect can go wrong. Intellect can lead on a very wrong path. I mean, to just raise intellect up to a pedestal, it does seem mistaken. And there's just some things that can't be defined or reasoned. But in certain places, the Maimonides, the Rambam seems to be imply that that's the case. It was more common in medieval times, particularly in the Muslim countries, to believe that intellect and the soul were kind of almost one, and that, you know, that intellect is really the highest calling. And that intellect really knew what was right. If we only just were super rational, we'd know the right thing to do. But don't forget, that was in a world where it was a much more God-conscious world. I mean, where despite all the medieval problems, right, but all the great civilizations, I mean, both the Islamic Empire and the Christian Empire, but there was a belief in God with any type of issues they may have. And so everyone took that as a given, and then human reason was then, you know, used to develop on those basic values and principles. So that was a beautiful thing, you know, which I guess you could call the Renaissance. You know, that was what the Renaissance at least started from. Started based on that idea of, you know, that human beings are created in the image of God, and that the world is God's creation, and we should look to creation in terms of being, you know, God's handiwork and what can we learn from it. And so the original basis of developing the human mind and science in the Renaissance was based on a belief in God, not the opposite. So you had the right values, and you know, and now we're in totally different. We're in a very sad state right now, actually, I have to say, because what's really happened. I'm going a little bit off the text, but it's an important point to mention, and that is that we're in a situation where both science and religion have been impoverished. And the reason is that the religion can't reach out to science because science rebelled against religion. But that cuts off religion from a lot of important, you know, developments that can help with reason into how to reach the goals of its values. But it often remains very ignorant of science because science insists on constantly yelling how it's completely independent of God and throws off any yoke of relationship to God and screams out that so many scientists, atheists are atheists. And so then turning to the other way, science has become so impoverished because it's completely confused in terms of its direction and also in terms of its place. The scientists who say that, see these ridiculous things like, if we only found out what the first particle is, we'd solve all the world's mysteries and we know the meaning of life. I mean, are you listening to yourself? How is finding out what a particle is show you what the meaning of life is? It doesn't make any sense, but they kept saying things like this. And basically, it leads, I think, to a lot of depression, a lot of confusion, and people being lost. Because they keep telling people religion is primitive and telling them that you can find meaning with us, but you can't. You can't find meaning in science. Science is, and there's a great book on this by Rabbi Sachs. I mean, Rabbi Sachs is just somebody that really you should all become, familiar with. If you're not familiar with his writing, may his memory be a blessing. He was Lord Rabbi. I don't know what he referred himself as, which title, but he was actually what do they call that when they make you a noble in England? But he was I forgot what that's called. It slipped my mind. But anyway, he was made by the Queen of England or something. He was given a title. So he's called Lord. Lived in England. Anyway, his name is Rabbi Jonathan Sachs. He wrote many books before he passed away about 2 years ago. And most of you are probably familiar with him. But if you're not, he wrote a book called, I have at home, called The Great Partnership. Really worth reading. It's about the relation between science and religion and how their purpose is to do different things. That's really the basis. Is that he says religion is about meaning. That's the kind of the underpinning of the book is like a lot of the questions that people ask fall away. I mean, not that, in other words, if science comes and says that the world wasn't created in 6 days, okay, I may believe that science somehow is mistaken. I trust Jewish tradition. But let's say you don't feel comfortable with that approach. It really doesn't matter because God's, the Hebrew Torah is not really about to tell us about when the world was created. It's not its purpose. Its purpose is to tell us how to live. Its purpose is to tell us what the meaning of life is. That's not its real purpose. And so it's not really, it's not, a make or break, I would say. And you can see this even, it's not a scientific book trying to tell us, what was the mechanics of creation. That's my point. To whatever extent it does talk about creation, it's here to teach us more about what creation teaches us about God and therefore how we should, love and fear him and also how to follow in his ways than it is about how God made the world. It's not, it's not our main concern. So anyway, it just solves a lot of these issues that really aren't really, and it frees up religion not to, in other words, not to be weakened by these questions that these scientists bring up, which are neither here nor there. And really, for a human being, it's a lot more important. There are certain scientists and technicians that create the innovations and inventions we use, and then we use them. And that's that. You learn how to use them, and that's the end of it. But in terms of meaning, we all need to know how to conduct ourselves in life. We all need to know how to make sure we don't feel empty in our lives and that we're fulfilling why we're here. That's something everybody has to know. So you know, but then at the same time, you can say, well, look at all these good that science has done and relieved so much sickness, and made life much more livable. It made us able to help people in so many different ways. So that's the point, that science could be such a wonderful tool, but it also could be very, very dangerous, as we know, with nuclear weapons and mass killings and all kinds of other toxic things that I don't have to tell you could take place based on science. Okay, so that's that. I got a little off, but I think it was important to bring it up. Meaning, there's a meaning and expediency. Difference between meaning and technology. Meaning, in other words, the meaning or the means, basically. What is the objective and what are our tools? Two totally different questions. I think by telling people that you can, gain everything you want only through science is in a certain way an outgrowth of the idea of the American dream, which is that the goal in life is to become financially secure. It's also misleading because that's not the goal in life. There's an interesting little video on YouTube about a Jewish young man who was not religious. His name is, I guess I'm a little bit promoting this guy now, but his name is Beryl Solomon. And he made a movie, I think it was called Orthodox, ED at the end, I think is the name of the movie. Anyway, so in the movie, he talks about how he became super successful as a very young man became like an internet, what do you call it? An internet superstar. I think he was one of the first people that did, life. What do they call those type of things? But it's real life video. What is it called again? I forget there's a name for it. But anyway, it's not theater, but it's real life, taking videos of people's real life. He was very successful, evidently. I don't know. Anyway, he got to the top there. He became very famous, millions of views, lots of money, and then he crashed. Then he completely collapsed. And the reason is because he got to this top and he thought that he would be and he felt empty. And so he didn't know what to do. He just had like a psychological breakdown, And that's when he started searching different religions and stuff. Thank God he came back home to Judaism in the end. But the reason I'm saying this, obviously, is because of the danger of this American dream myth. And I'm not saying it in terms of it's a wonderful thing to have financial independence or to have a home, a car, a family, those wonderful things. I'm not knocking them. I'm just simply saying that it gives the impression that that's the meaning of life, or that's the whole thing that your purpose is to get to, and there's nothing, that's it. You get there, you've succeeded in life, you can relax, you have everything. And that's really I think where America became confused, and probably why we have a lot of the problems we have now, because of that problem, where, a lot of parents, I've said this before, maybe not recently, but, a lot of parents that say, Dad, maybe take his son to play ball, fix a car, talking about work, how to make money. And the kid's got no direction. It's got no direction in terms of meaning, in terms of a way to live a good, ethical life, or, there's a God in the world and we're here to do good, and, and so on and so forth. And without that, eventually things start to people get restless, they feel empty, there's a lot of depression and things like that, which is what we're seeing now. Okay. Anyway, I got off topic, but I think that's okay. It's all right. Not so bad. But that's really the point. Let me get back to the point here. The point is that the difference between intellect and soul, and why we're saying that the soul is above intellect, is because the idea is that the soul's principles and truths, they need no rationalization. They don't need to be proven. We don't need to prove anything. They just are as a fact. Just like we see things and know things, just like the scientists say that there is a certain amount of elements, which I forgot, learned it in grade school, but I don't remember what it is right now, right? But there are a few hundred of them or something. You know, it's just a fact. They found it out, and this is what it is. You don't ask, well, how do we know? Why don't we split it down the middle? Why don't we do division, subtraction? No, this is just what it is. On a much, much higher level than that, you know, because you can't even begin. This is something that we can't even, it's not something that's within our realm of the physical world to say, oh, you know, I can argue with that. I can say that that isn't true. No, there's nothing to argue here. There's nothing to begin to discuss. And that's very key also, because once there's argument, there's two sides, and God forbid a person to follow the other side. In other words, once we start saying that these beliefs are rational, oh, this makes a person a good life, this makes a person a harmonious society. What if someone says, well, no, it doesn't? Or someone says, well, right now, you know, there's climate change and we need to kill off, you know, half the population or something like that, because that's what's harmonious. The point is, reason, you know, reasons can lead in many different directions. The idea of the soul saying, this is the truth, and it's immutable. It can't be changed. There's no two ways to look at it. This is always how it is, period. You know, and you'll see a lot of things in Judaism in that way. It's just, you know, this is right and this is wrong. There's no discussion of, well, let's talk about this. You know, what about in this circumstance? Although, again, sometimes there are unique circumstances, true, but basically they're black and whites, right? This is right, this is wrong. Certain behaviors are wrong, period. They're always wrong. And even in an extreme case where we may allow it, doesn't make it right. You know, maybe sanctioned in an extreme circumstance, rarely, for example, desecration of the Sabbath to save a life, you know. But other things are never permitted, such as adultery, you know, and murder and other things, idolatry. Anyway, so that is really the point here. The point is that soul stands above reason, and its principles stand above reason. You can't rationalize out of them, just the same way you can't rationalize into them. Now, I want to add one more point before we stop, and that is that, but yet once we're established, we should use reason. That's really the difference, I think, in a certain sense, between Judaism and maybe other religions, is that once we have these principles, then we do begin to exercise reason very rigorously. Once we say, okay, these are the principles, okay, how should they be applied? You know, or what are the details of them? You know, and then we start really getting into it. Like some people may consider it OCD, but, you know, every single detail. What is this? If you know, I am the Lord your God, what does that mean about every facet of life? You know, what does that mean about how I should behave in everywhere I go? How should I behave in the shower? What does I am the Lord your God tell me about how to behave when I'm in the shower? I mean, that's from a Jewish perspective, it affects all areas of life. And that's the thing we're saying about Noahide, is that God from all of humanity just said, look, I'm just going to demand of everybody else, not that you're my servants and priests every moment of your lives, but don't rebel against me. Don't act in a way that's abhorrent to me during your lifetime. And that's idolatry, blasphemy, murder, theft, the limb of a living animal, and courts. All those things are just the basics. You know, not to that them is you're a bad person. Don't be a bad person. That's the point. Don't do evil. Don't do harm spiritually, physically. As far as being my servant every moment, Torah doesn't demand that of the nation. Obviously, the thing is, Benoah can opt to, as a voluntary, to that, as we've spoken about many times, to devote their lives to serving God. They can do that, but they're not obligated to do that. To a great extent, a Jew is obligated, because if you look at the 613, since they encompass every area of life, and the halacha is even much more expansive. So basically, every moment you're following God's will, and that way you're serving him at every moment. Okay. Questions, comments after I commented for half an hour? Anyone else have anything to say?
Thank you, Rabbi. Very good.
You're welcome. You're welcome. Thank you, everyone, for joining me.
Thank you. Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you, Rabbi.
You're welcome. Good night.